Good evening and welcome to the Italian Impact Podcast. I am your host, Steve Stefano Mancini, and as always, I want to thank you, my listeners. Now, a little fun fact. So every week, I like to go peek and see how the downloads and who's tuning in and all that good stuff. What's absolutely blowing my mind is obviously the most listeners are coming from the United States, but I want to give a shout out to the listeners that are coming in from other countries like Australia, Canada, Singapore, the United Kingdom, Italy, Brazil, a whole bunch of other countries out there that I'm absolutely so appreciative of you. So if you're in one of those countries, I know you're listening and I want to thank you for tuning in, and hopefully you're coming back because you're enjoying the show. I do try and keep the show light. I try and bring on good guests. And as always, you're welcome to email me. I can have a guest from anywhere in the world. So if you have someone you'd like to see on or hear on this show, feel free to email me at questions@ItalianImpactWeekly.com. Again, that's questions@ItalianImpactWeekly.com. So looking forward to hearing from you. I have gotten suggestions for guests through the email, and as a result, I've put folks on here that I would not have known if not for you, the listeners. So the folks all over the world, I know you're listening, and I am so appreciative of that. A little fun fact, I had the opportunity to be on a really good podcast called The Lion's Den. They were guests on this podcast not too long ago. Had a great time. When that gets posted, I'm going to share that with you. Those guys are awesome, and I appreciate them having me on the show. And always, I want to mention, this is the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. If you are going to be in the Chambersburg area, 11 September, they will be celebrating the 80th anniversary of the construction and dedication of the chapel that was built by the Italian prisoners of war. So if you're going to be anywhere near central Pennsylvania, I really encourage you, go out there. I'm going to be there on 11 September. Again, that's Chambersburg, PA. We're going to be at the chapel. And if you want to know more about the story, I'm going to sell it. I'm going to keep selling it. I think it's a great story. I think the people in it were wonderful. But it is called Fedeltà, Soldier Prisoner, and it is available on Amazon Prime. Now, for my international listeners, I apologize. You may not be able to get it on Amazon Prime. So I am working on some other ways to get that distributed internationally. It is available for my folks in the United Kingdom. You can get it on Amazon.uk. So if you are in the UK and you are listening, please check it out. It's called Fedeltà, Soldier Prisoner, and it tells the story of the Italian prisoners in Chambersburg, PA. Now, moving on, as always, I like to give a little administrivia about the honorary consul. Everyone knows I'm the honorary consul for the Italian government here in the Pittsburgh region. A lot of folks don't know this. This is a volunteer job. I try and spend time in the office on Mondays and Fridays, so I'm getting a lot of calls on a lot of topics. Keep in mind, as an honorary consular, I am limited in what authorities I have, but know this. I continue to try to support you to the best of my ability, and you're always welcome to call me. If I can help you, I will help you. If not, I will try to provide you resources for folks that can help you. Now, time to get done with all the administrivia, and the reason you're here is to listen to a wonderful guest. His name is Richard Graziano. He is the co-president of the Italian Genealogical Group, and I met him when I was in New York at the Calandra Institute showing the documentary Fedeltà. And Richard, I appreciated him coming and showing up, and I liked him so much, and we kind of hit it off that I said, I got to have you on the podcast. So, Richard, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Steve. Pleasure to be here.
I'm glad to have you. So, Richard, we haven't, you need to be very blunt to the folks listening. We haven't known each other that long, but I started doing a little homework on the group. But what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about you, because folks are going to learn all about the Italian Genealogical Group, but there's probably a reason you're involved in that. So let's talk about that. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? Where's your family from?
Well, I'm from New York. I grew up in Queens. I was a teacher for, are you ready for this, 51 years.
That's it?
Between between high schools and college. I taught in the City University of New York, where I taught tourism and hospitality, and I became the department chair for a period of time. And so I have a doctorate in education. I spend a lot of time doing volunteer work. I'm a docent on the High Line, which is an old rail line that's been made into a park on the west side of Manhattan, and I do tours there. And the rest of my time, I think I spent doing genealogy.
It's fantastic. Now, where's your family from? Obviously, with a good name like Graziano, they're obviously Italian.
Right.
Where are they from?
Well, yes, that's true. Well, I grew up among my mother's family, the Schiavelli family in Jamaica, Queens, and they come from a little town called Quindici, the number 15 in Italian. There are actually two stories about that town. One is that it's so named because of it's around 15 kilometers from Naples. That's the boring story. The good story is that it was founded by 15 ne'er-do-wells who came to this town and realized that it was a great place to hide out because it's surrounded on three sides by mountains, and if the Carabinieri were on their way in, they could flee to the mountains and stay there till they left. So
something tells me it's a little a column A and a little a column B.
Yes, that's the better story. Exactly. So
now, is your father? Where's your father
my
from?
My dad's family is from Abruzzo.
Okay.
From a little town called Chieti. The province of Chieti, the comune is called Crecchio.
Oh, okay.
Now, I didn't know any of that until I started doing genealogy. So I knew quite a bit about my mother's family, but my father wasn't much of a talker. So when I started doing genealogy, I said to him, so tell me, where's your family from? He says, I have no idea. So that didn't, not much help there. So, but eventually I wound up finding some key documents along the way that told me where my grandfather grew up and was born, and that led me to a pathway that led me back into the 1700s in terms of my family tree.
Now, you said you're a dual citizen. Did you get that from birth, or did you get that later on?
No, I got that 2 years ago. I went through the process before they made all the changes, the recent changes that have taken place. I applied. I made the appointment with the consulate in New York in 2018. The appointment was for a year later, and I spent that year gathering documents and apostilles and all the other things that you needed to get, and was successful in achieving or having my citizenship recognized. I was eligible because my grandfather, Angelo Graziano, came to this country in 1905. My dad was born in 1915, but my grandfather didn't naturalize until the 1940s, which was not unusual for Italian immigrants. They didn't realize the necessity of naturalization until it became obvious that Italy was going to be on the wrong side of that war. So then they rushed to get their citizenship done. So pretty common.
No, that's absolutely true. In fact, that was kind of what happened to me in a roundabout way, but it was my great-grandfather. He passed away before he got his citizenship. So that line was never broken. Now, the funny that you mentioned the changes in the laws, because under the new laws, I would not have gotten my Italian citizenship. And even under the new laws, my kids cannot get through the Iur Sanguis. They can't get that passed down to them. So I think people don't understand. These laws changed a lot of things. I do think personally that the change to some degree was needed, because I think there are a lot of people, and we're going to segue into the genealogical stuff in a second, but I want to, preface that with this. A lot of people, when you say, why do you want to become an Italian citizen, they really don't have an answer. There's no connection. They don't speak the language. They just want that passport. So if they go to Europe, they can skip the line. They're not going to buy property. They're not going to live there. But there are other people that are getting that passport to get out of their country. So in the U.S., I think it's too much of a status thing. In other countries, it's their ticket to get out of that country. Well, I had a great-great-great-great-great-grandfather back in the 1800s. He was an Italian. Therefore, I get my Italian passport. Now I can leave this country and get out of here. Neither one of those is good reasons, in my opinion. So when people are going to go through that much effort, I think you have to have a deeper reason. Now, at some point, you had a deeper reason to connect to your roots. Talk about that. When did that passion become, something that you actually started acting on? Well,
we have to go back about 40 years. As I mentioned, I grew up among my mother's family, and a few of my cousins realized that as the family continued to grow and more children were born, that most of the people in the family probably couldn't recognize each other if they walked past them in the street. And so they began to do this annual family picnic, which, by the way, is still going on. It's in its 52nd or 53rd year. And you would go there, and you would see about 200 people would come to the picnic. But you would primarily hang out with your first cousins, so those are the ones you knew. But you knew that you were related to everybody who was at this picnic. How? You had no idea. So one year I showed up with a big piece of white cardboard, a piece of oak tag, and I sat down at the table and I asked for each family unit member to come and tell me who they were, how they related, and they began to sketch out this very rudimentary family tree. Because back then there was no ancestry, there was no family search. This was all pencil and paper and cut and paste and all kinds of things of that nature. We wound up with about a couple of hundred people on this chart, and then I sent it out to everybody I knew, and then I forgot about it. Then in 2015, my mom passed away, and I was kind of looking for things to do, and I said to my wife, usually a dangerous thing to say, I think I've got some free time. What should I do with it? So she actually said three things, a couple of things. One, she directed me, said, well, you like bringing people to the High Line when they're visiting New York. Why don't you go be a volunteer there, which I have done and done now for 10 years. And then she said, you've always been interested in family history from way back when. Why don't you take a course and learn more about how the modern family historians get their information? So I said, that's a great idea. She said, good, because I've already enrolled you in a course. So I took a course, and in the middle of it somewhere, I learned that there was an organization called the Italian Genealogical Group. And I began to attend their meetings. And now 10 years or 11 years later, I'm co-president. So if there was a long-term interest in this topic, but I didn't really get involved heavily until about 10 years ago. Now I have about 3,000 people on my family tree.
Wow.
So I've been pretty successful.
So does this genealogical group help others find their roots, or is it more or less a how-to kind of organization? I'm curious to know, what does the organization do?
We don't do the research for you, but we will help you to learn how to do the research.
Okay.
So, for example, we meet on the second Saturday of every month, and these days it's on Zoom as well as being in person on Long Island in Bethpage. And there's a speaker every month that talks about some aspect of genealogy, and it could be finding someone who was an orphan, or finding someone who was a foundling, or how do you use the census to help you find your family records, or it could be something having to do with Italian culture or something of that nature. So every month there is a speaker, but also if you came a little bit early to the meeting, there's a help desk, and one of our experts would sit with you and help you to find get past the most current things. There's some basic rules that you have to follow. The rules basically are that you start with what you know, and you bring to the table, and you decide, you let us know, would let the expert know who your parents were, who your grandparents were. A key factor in all of this in Italian research is what town or comune did your people come from. And that's a key factor, because once you can learn that, then you can go back pretty far. But the idea is to start with the current and start moving yourself backwards. And so you're going to be using, in the beginning, lots of American records, U.S. records, so census records, naturalization records, immigration records, World War II draft registrations. I was very surprised, for example, to find that my grandfather, who was, by the time of World War II started, he was in his 60s, but he had to register for the draft, which to me was kind of bizarre. And they really weren't going to draft him into the Army, but they wanted to know kind of where he was and how they might find him if they needed him. You're going to be looking at alien registration records. You're going to be looking at all sorts of things like that. So there's vital records, birth records, marriage records, death records. And all those things move you backwards, little by little, one generation at a time, until you reach the point where your family arrived from Italy. And then you can, if you know the town that they came from, you can then start researching the records of the town. And what I have to tell you, there are some amazing moments that happen. For example, when I was looking for my maternal grandfather's naturalization records, I found out that he was naturalized in a local courthouse in Queens. You could have been naturalized in a federal court, a state court, a local court. Any of those were performing naturalizations. So it turned out that he was naturalized in the Supreme Court of New York, which is the lowest court in New York, in Jamaica, Queens. So I went there and said to the clerk, county clerk, that I wanted to find this particular record. I had the number by that point, and she told me to sit down and wait. And she sent one of her underlings down into the basement, and he brings up this huge book covered with dust, and they opened up, and there was my grandfather's original naturalization petition with his signature.
Wow, the original. Did you expect this? Did you think that was going to be there?
No, I had no idea what I was going to find. This was very early in my research, and so I had no idea what I'd find. But it was an amazing moment, you know. Right. And so you learn certain things as you go along. You know, for example, my mom passed away in 2015, and there are questions that I wish I had asked her, and every genealogist will tell you the same thing. It's a lament of every single genealogist that they didn't ask the questions that now might take you months or years of research to answer, or maybe you'd never find the answer. To give you a perfect example, something happened this week. I gotten a photograph of some ancestors of my father's family, and there were 6 people in the photograph, and I knew 2 of them. I was able to find the identities of 2 others from another cousin, and then that cousin said, well, those other 2 guys, they're relative brothers of the one woman. The one woman is my grandfather's sister. So those 2 guys could be my great uncles.
Huh. And you had no idea that they existed?
Well, I knew who those people existed, but I didn't. Some of these people, I don't know what they look like.
Right.
You know, and here's a photograph.
Right.
And so I asked, well, do you know anything about them? And she said no. And then she uttered a statement that to me tells you a lot, and that is, she said, and there's no one left that I could ask.
Yeah.
Because they're all gone. So I kind of formulated this first, what I call the first law of genealogy in my research, and that is ask the people who are still around, because not only do they know who's who, they know the stories.
That's
they know all the things that even if you find these people in the records, they don't have the inside story of, you know, what happened to this person when he was 12 years old that made him take up a particular line of occupation, or maybe somebody who committed the crime or something like that. You're not going to find those necessarily in the records, but those older folks, they know the story.
Right. It's just a name in the book.
It's important to talk to them.
That's right. Richard, I'm going to be right back. I got to pay the bill. So, folks, don't go anywhere. I'll be right back.
Ciao, Chrissy. Your Italian got so much better. Brava.
Grazie. It's because I learned the best way possible.
How so?
Well, I learned that with apps, grammar books, and even YouTube videos, I could only get so far. I had to immerse myself. I noticed I did best when I was in Italy visiting family. That's where my level really soared.
And wow, did it work?
Thanks. I became much more confident, fast. That's why I created Footsteps Through Time. It's an Italian language experience. You don't just take Italian classes, you immerse yourself in a real Italian village. With lots of fun activities and excursions, it's life-changing.
I see. So, no more boring grammar, impersonal apps, just real conversations, real culture, and delicious food, of course.
Exactly. I'm so excited about this. Learn Italian by actually becoming part of the local community for a week and living it. So if you've been dreaming of Italy and the language, check out Footsteps Through Time in Italy.com. Book now and join the experience.
Andiamo!
Thanks to Greater Pittsburgh Travel. For any of your travel needs, let Tom and the team at Greater Pittsburgh Travel know, and they'll take care of you. For more information, call 412-331-2600 2244 or visit their website at www.greaterpittsburghtravel.com. Did your parents or grandparents ever talk about the Vietnam War? The Hardest Year, a love story and letters during the Vietnam War, is an accurate portrayal of what life was like during the 1960s, a time of the draft, equal rights, and the anti-war movement. Follow newlyweds through their letters as they navigate 1 year of the war an ocean apart. The Hardest Year by Carol and William Wagner is available now wherever books are sold. And we want to thank the Calabria Club of Pittsburgh. If you're interested in learning more, you can find their contact information on Facebook at Calabria Club of Pittsburgh. Again, thanks Domenica and the team at the Calabria Club of Pittsburgh for your support. And we want to thank La Scuola d'Italia Galileo Galilei, the only nonprofit school in Pittsburgh endorsed by the Italian Consulate. If you're interested in learning Italian or have your children being immersed in the Italian culture and language, be sure to give them a call at 412-404-7070. And that's La Scuola d'Italia Galileo Galilei. We'd also like to thank Chris Gonzalez from the Knights of Columbus. If you have any questions about joining the Knights of Columbus, reach out to Chris Gonzalez at 412-605-9074. The San Rocco Foundation will be celebrating their 100th celebration. Our celebration will be August 8th, 9th, and 10th at St. Francis Cabrini Parish Campus, Mary Queen of Saints. Events start at 4 p.m. each day. On Sunday, August 10th, Mass will begin at 9 a.m. at St. Titus Church in Aliquippa. There will be a procession immediately following. For more information, check out their website at www.sanroccofoundation.org. Again, that's www.sanroccofoundation.org. Hello, Bucco fans. This is Steve Stefano Mancini, international award-winning filmmaker and host of the award-winning Italian Impact podcast. Join us in celebrating the Italian community on August 23rd as the Pirates take on the Colorado Rockies. This special offer includes an exclusive Pirates co-branded Italian hat and loaded value, good to use on concessions and merchandise on the day of the game. Also, a portion of each ticket will be donated to a local Italian charity. So come experience a unique blend of sports, culture, and community during Italian Heritage Night at PNC Park. Grazie, ci vediamo. All right, welcome back, and I'm being joined by Richard Graziano, co-president of the Italian Genealogical Group. And Richard and I are just kind of, right before the break, we started talking about the importance, and Richard, by the way, this has been one of my themes, to ask those older generations before they're gone anything. Tell me about your parents. What do you remember about your grandparents? What about your great uncles, great aunts? Something. There's this old picture in the bottom of the drawer. Who is this person? All of these questions. And you know, when I was showing the documentary last year in Italy, I was trying to tell these little kids. I'm like, and I do it in the States when I talk to you. I says, you got to ask your grandparents now before they're gone, because you might not care now, but you might find out that by the time you do care, there's no one there. But you nailed it, Richard, because when I was really kind of jumping in both feet into my genealogy, they're all gone. There's no one I can ask. I was lucky to have found a relative when I went back to Italy that was old enough to remember her grandmother, who would have been my grandmother's aunt. And so, I was able to touch one, what I'll call a string to the past. And ironically, after I spoke with her, I think 2 months later, she passed away. So I was like, I just made it. And so I really encourage the listeners, don't wait. Start digging, start asking. Richard, let me ask you something. Are you surprised? Because here's something I hear a lot. A lot of people say, my relatives were from this town, but it was destroyed during the war. Are you surprised, or do you run into the wall of, talking to people, that there is a wall of records were destroyed or they're gone, or have you never run into that?
Oh, no, that happens all the time. You'll also, for example, this town of Quindici, apparently the municipal building burned down with the records. But what a lot of people don't know is that there's another copy of those records in the state archive. And so there's a website called Antenati, Antenati, from which you can often get many of the records, the duplicate records, and that is all online. And if you get lucky, those records will be in those state archives. So to give you an example, we talked before about the idea that I didn't know much about my father's family. Well, when I found on my grandfather's naturalization papers the name of the town he came from. Again, Crecchio was what it was called, in the province of Chieti in the region of Abruzzo. And when I went on Antenati, and some of these records are also on FamilySearch.org, you sometimes have to use both in tandem. I found his birth record. Now, all of a sudden, there's my grandfather's birth record right in front of me on the screen. Now, what does it tell me? It tells me the date of birth. It tells me the names of his parents and generally their ages. Now, if I have his father, so his father was Angelo Antonio Graziano, and he was, I don't remember the exact age, let's say he was 35. And so my grandfather was born in 1889. If I subtract 35, I can now go back and try to find Angel Antonio's birth record, on which would be his parents. And so I can follow that path all the way back as far as I can go. Most of the Italian records go back to about 1808. That's the year that Napoleon conquers Italy and institutes Code Napoleon, which provides that all vital records, birth, marriage, and death records, will be held by the state, not only by the church. So if you find, for example, the death record of your fourth or fifth great-grandfather who dies in 1808 and he's 80 years old, you now know that your fourth or fifth great-grandfather was born in 1720 or 28.
That's funny you say that, because that's as far back, I think, as I could. On one of the sides that I went back and looked, I think that was as far back as I could get into, was the 1700s. But I don't know if that was because there was a guesstimate on when they died, or if that was legitimately, there may have been a surviving record. So that's really interesting that you say that. What's been the biggest surprise to you just in the whole process itself?
One is that what you think you know, you don't know.
Ain't that the truth?
So some of the lore is not true, and you'll find the record that disproves that. And then there are lots of surprises that come as you follow the path backwards. So, for example, I didn't know this, but my grandfather had a brother named Pasquale, and I found that he had, at that point in 1918, he had I think it was 5 children at that point, and his wife dies from the Spanish flu. So he's now left with these 5 children, and unlike today where you might be able to get some assistance, he had to go to work. So the children were farmed out. And so 2 of them went to the pretty awful sounding place called the Home for Friendless Children. You can imagine what that was like. 2 of the girls were sent to an aunt, and the 5th child was adopted by the local barber. Now, I found out this 5th child's name because I looked at an obituary. Now, obituaries are really interesting sources of information, but remember that the person who died is not writing the obituary. So right. It all depends upon
if they are, they've got different problems, but I got it.
Right. How much does the person know who's writing the obituary or giving the information? And so it turns out that this kid's name was James Azat, and he was a brother of the Grazianos, and I couldn't figure that out for about a year. And then I finally figured out that he was adopted by another family. And so that was a surprise. And then you get to solve mysteries. To me, genealogy is like a giant detective story. So my father had a sister who disappeared in 1947. She came home after their father died for the reading of the will. She was married to a serviceman who was on his way to the occupation force in Japan, and they never saw her again. And so over and over and over again, my father would say, I always wonder what happened to my sister Rose. And that went on for years and years and years. And then finally, when computers came on the scene, he said to me, Richard, you know something about computers. Why don't you find Rose? Well, there was no ancestry. There was no internet. So it was hopeless. And then through a series of lucky events, I was able to find the serviceman's last name, who we thought was Helm, Helm, and it turned out to be a Swedish name, Hjelm. Several hours after I learned that, I found Rose. Unfortunately, she had passed away, but I found my first cousin who never knew I existed.
Wow.
And we have met a number of times since then. So
That's
it's really amazing. You get amazing stories and experiences.
No, and I think that's the biggest thing is you don't know who's out there that, you
Right.
know, I know that blood doesn't always guarantee a connection, but at the same time, it's probably the best place to start. So in your case, a first cousin, it's, you know, short of a brother or sister, that's as close as it would get. And, you know, didn't know each other. Now, you know, hopefully you have a good relationship. What is some advice you give to people that are starting out?
Ask questions. So again, not only of the people around you, but if you went to, for example, I was, there are these things called family search centers. They're usually located in Mormon temples around the country. And I was doing some research in one of them in Plainview, Long Island. And eventually I became a volunteer at one of those. But and I was at the very beginning of things, and I was looking at these Italian records. And I, like many, many other second-generation Italians, do not speak Italian, for the reason that my parents wanted to make me and my sister as American as possible, and therefore never spoke Italian in the house unless they were speaking to each other and they did not want us to know what they were saying. So I was looking at these Italian records, could not come, I didn't know what I was looking at. And so I just turned to one of the people who was in the room and I said, can you help me with this? And one of the things that's true of the genealogical community is that people are very willing to help. And so this fellow helped me to learn how to read this document. And once you learn how, you know, what the key phrases are and whatnot, and then you can begin to look at these things and realize what you're looking at. So that's one piece of advice. Ask questions, not only to the people in your family, because they might have the pictures or the documents or whatever it might be, but also to the people who are doing research sitting next to you. And also, you know, not all records are online, first of all, and even those that are, the records that are not there today might be there tomorrow. And so it's important to keep looking and keep working at it. I always say that genealogy is a long game. You may not find what you're looking for today, but it might be there next month or the month after. So those are some of the things that I've learned.
Now let me ask you one kind of a final question, kind of a little deeper one. Why is this important?
Well, I think it's important to know who you are and where you came from. You know, I think, for example, one of the side benefits that happened as a result of all of this was I began to learn something about the immigration process and what people went through. And, you know, right now the immigration is a hot topic and you probably have strong feelings one way or the other. But if you don't know what your ancestors went through when they came here, I think you're missing out on seeing the big picture. So, for example, all four of my grandparents came here in the 1903, 1904, 1905, etc. And so, basically, back then, if you wanted to come, you came. There were really not very few restrictions. And then in the 1920s, because of eugenics and a belief that Italians were somehow inferior, they began to pass laws that restricted immigration. First, passing literacy requirements. Then in 1921, the first of the Quota Acts was passed. So if you look at the numbers of immigration in, let's say, 1920, there were 200,000 Italians who came here that year. Okay, and then they implement the first quotas, which reduced that to about 40,000. So a pretty significant decrease. And then in 1924, they passed a law which it was in effect for the next 40 or 50 years, which severely limited immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe. So now Italian immigration was limited to 4,000 from 200,000. And so you learn that that's the prevailing thinking in the United States, that somehow we were not up to snuff. We could never become true Americans. And so you get a feeling for how important understanding immigration is to understanding the current situation.
That's funny that you say that, because I don't believe that prejudice goes away overnight. And I still think that there's a lot of prejudice against the Italian community, a legacy. There's a lot of stories. You can go all the way back to, for example, no matter how you feel about Columbus Day, why was that holiday instituted? There's a lot of stories like that. And when people forget those stories, to your point, they forget that there was a struggle. And so, now you've got people just say, I'm one of these people that just believes that whether you like the laws or not, the laws are the laws. You don't have to like them, but the laws are the laws. You don't like them, go run for Congress and change the laws. That's my philosophy. But at the same time, anybody should be able to come here if they meet that criteria. So Italians paid a price, and I still think that there's some legacy from that. And to your point on the genealogical studies, I've learned a lot more stories as a result. So it's not just about pieces of paper and a name and a date on a piece of paper. It's the stories behind that really kind of open your eyes, and you go, wow, I didn't know that. Wow, that's pretty interesting. Wow, that's pretty funny or pretty sad or pretty whatever. But it's, there's more to, genealogical studies than just names on paper. Would you agree with that?
Right. Oh, absolutely. The stories are important. That fellow, my great uncle Pasquale, after he loses his wife, he sends a message back to the old country. And this is a great story. He sends a message back. He says, basically, I need a wife. I've got 5 kids. I need a wife. So coincidentally, there's a young woman in the town. This is 1920. So she had lost her husband in World War I and had a child. So they say to her, go to the United States, marry this guy, and he'll take care of you and your child. So she comes to the U.S., and she arrives on Ellis Island. Pasquale comes from Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, where he lived, and all bearing gifts and his Sunday best. And he meets her, and somewhere in the conversation, he says the words, we'll get married, you'll come back to Wilkes-Barre, you'll meet my 5 kids. And there's a pause. And she says, 5 kids? No one told me that. I'm sorry, I can barely manage the one I have. I can't do that.
Oh, my God. So she went back to Italy?
And so she doesn't actually go back to Italy. She winds up in there was a house run by the Scalabrini brothers in Manhattan called the Casa San Raffaele. She winds up there where she meets somebody else and eventually gets married. But poor Pasquale now has to go back home to Wilkes-Barre without a wife. And someone in the local newspaper gets wind of this. And so there's an article on the front page of the Wilkes-Barre Times Leader, and a couple of days later it says, a local Italian man left at the altar by Italian beauty.
Oh, no.
Front page. Yes. So that's a story.
Oh, poor guy.
That's a story.
I actually
feel
felt
and there are a
the
million of them. And then things like you had no idea. I think most people in the United States take for granted that if you have a baby, more than likely the baby's going to live. Okay.
Yeah. Now
it was always common in most families that there were children who never made it past the age of 3 or 4 or 5. There was one family on my tree where there were 15 children born, and only 3 of them made it to adulthood.
Wow.
And that gives you an idea as to why they came here. There wasn't enough food. There wasn't enough money. The health was bad. In the southern part of Italy, malaria and cholera were present all the time. And so oftentimes they fled and they came here. You know, when you think about it, most of these people lived in a little comune. They lived there most of their lives in that same spot. And now they're coming to Naples or to Palermo, and they're getting on a ship, spending several weeks on the ship, and arriving, you know, at Ellis Island, you know, and all of a sudden they're in a new place. They don't know the language. They don't know the people. They don't know how they're going to be treated, you know. By the way, I want to mention one myth that everybody should know about, and that is no one changed their name at Ellis Island. Okay?
Not on purpose.
The Ellis Island inspectors just read from the manifest prepared by the shipping company. And so there's actually a scene in The Godfather 2 where little Andolino comes to the place and his name is changed by the person. Never happened. So
was that just because of the Italians themselves were illiterate?
I'm sorry?
Was that just because the Italians themselves were often illiterate?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, they gave their name, and the person in the shipping company wrote it down, and they could have written it wrong. That's certainly possible. You know, the other thing that people should know when you're doing research, when you're researching the women in your family, Italian women kept their own names throughout their lives.
That's right. They still do, by the way.
I'm sorry?
They still do. In fact, I do a lot of passports, and you have to specifically say, use my married name. Otherwise, they don't change names. That's a cultural thing that I think a lot of Americans don't understand. It's not an insult. That's just they don't change their name.
So when you're looking at passenger manifest, for example, and the wife is coming with the children, the wife is traveling under her maiden name, and the children are traveling under the father's name.
That's right. That's right. They're not little bastard children. That's just the way they kept the names. That's right. Now, that's a good point, because I think a lot of people would see that and go, well, wait a minute, was grandma not married to grandpa? Like, no, they're probably married. They didn't just automatically change the name. And I'll tell you what else, it's funny you say that, because in Italy there's something called a codice fiscale, and I'd say the most equivalent thing would be like a social security number, and it's based off of your name, your comune, your like all this data about you that creates this unique value. And to your point, when you change the name, then the codice fiscale doesn't match. It's what there's a lot of reasons they don't change names in Italy like they do in the U.S. And the irony is we're the ones with the identity theft problems. Like, So you tell me what's going on. But Richard, what are some other final thoughts you'd like to share with the folks that are listening?
Well, I'd like to talk a little bit about the IGG, if we could.
Please.
Okay, so as I mentioned, I learned that there was this group going on in it was then a local group in Bethpage, Long Island, and I began going to the meetings and meeting people and getting help and talking to people and eventually, learning from the speakers and whatnot. And today, probably because of COVID, we became a national organization, because all of a sudden we began to Zoom our webinars across the country. And so today, it's gone from a local organization of maybe 100 members, 200 members. Now we have nearly 2,000 members in 48 states and many foreign countries. So it's really an important thing. And again, we have monthly meetings that you can use. If you become a member, you can watch the meetings. And we also have a newsletter that comes out 10 times a year. And as in many organizations, many of the same people do most of the jobs. And so not only am I co-president, I'm also editor of the newsletter as well. And so that's a 12-page newsletter that comes out every single month from September through June. And it has articles about how-to and the results of people's researches and immigration policy, and you name it, it's something in there. There's a culture column and whatnot. And so it's a really great organization. In fact, our newsletter just received a national award. From the National Genealogical Society.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. And as the editor, I'm extremely proud of that. And all of our writers who submit things, and our newsletter team as well. But it's the National Genealogical Society gave us the large Society Award for Best Newsletter. this year. So it was really quite an honor, and I'm delighted with that. So,
Oh, that's wonderful.
Also, our website has information about databases about New York City vital records, and the certificate numbers that you would need to get those. We have some church records on there, and so we're continually working on our website. And so, and to join is a ridiculously low amount of $25 a year. That's with getting the newsletter online. If you wanted a printed copy, then it would be $50 a year. But I encourage people to join because, you get to watch these webinars. We for example, last year, 1 year ago, in November, we did our first conference. We had a full day conference of workshops on Italian genealogy, and it was a huge success. And we've decided, because it was so successful, that we're going to run a second one in October of 2025. So at the end of this year, we'll be doing 2025, right? And so we'll be doing, no, I'm sorry, it'll be 2026. I'm sorry, I apologize. And we'll be doing a 2-day event. And it is all online. And the registration was very modest. I don't know what it'll be next time, but the last time it was $49 to register for the conference. And if you go to conferences around the country, you'll find out that conference registrations can be in the hundreds of dollars. So this was, I think it was if you had the early bird registration, was $49. And you got some of the premier genealogists and experts in Italian genealogy giving workshops, and you had access to all of those workshops for 6 months after the conference was over. So that's coming up. And so there's a really good reason to join our group. And it's something that it changed my life when I began going to these meetings, and I began to learn how to do this. And I must warn everybody, however, genealogy is an addiction.
It's fun though. It's like you said. It's like
nothing else.
It's a mystery. It's a puzzle, and I actually enjoy it. Richard, I want to thank you for joining me today, and I will put the link to the website down there in the description. So if you go down in the description, you'll see the link. But I want to mention this, to all the listeners. Number one, you don't have to be Italian to do this. This is, that's the focus, but that's not the limitations. Like I said, I've got listeners coming from the United Kingdom, different countries in the Middle East. I got from Singapore. I've even got people coming in from Russia, China, a lot of countries, even from several countries in Africa where I've got a decent listenership, which again, I thank you very much for joining. So I would encourage you.
I should mention to you on that topic, there is a German genealogy group.
Right.
There's an Irish group. There's a Jewish group.
There's a lot of groups out there. Right.
Yeah.
And I would encourage people to go find them, join them, and then do your own research on your own family, because it's just fun to go back as far as you can go and see, well, how far back can I trace my family? So you don't have to be Italian to do this. And Richard, I do appreciate your insight. I'm going to put a link to the website. By the way, real quick, since you were mentioning those other groups, do you guys have links to any of them on your website?
Offhand, I don't think we do. Okay. But if you just type in your ethnicity and genealogy, those groups will come up.
Right. So I want to encourage anyone that's listening. You do not have to be Italian to do this, and I would encourage you to do it just because it's fun. It is a puzzle, and I think you might find out that there's always something interesting in your family tree, because eventually these family trees are going to converge at some point. So Richard, I want to thank you very much for joining me today. I want to thank the listeners for tuning in. And as always, I hope, God willing, I will be back next week with another wonderful guest. In the meantime, you have a wonderful and a blessed week, and I will see you again in the near future. Thanks again.